and it has been reviewed in The Hindu, The Caravan, First Post, and many others. I call upon the stage the creative director Mary Kurkalang, together with Raman and Daribha, to launch Name, Place, and Animal Thing. Please, a round of applause. Thank you, Mary. Daribha Lyndem will be in conversation with Raman Shrestha. Raman Shrestha is a bookseller and publisher at Rachna Books Gangtok, which was founded in 1979. Rachna Books has grown to be a vibrant cultural landmark in the Himalayas. Fiercely independent, Rachna Books is known for its curation and distinctive collection. Raman has organized a wide range of events at the bookshop, including arts, literature, screenings, performances, lectures, and workshop. He is also the founding member of Independent Bookshop Association of India. I hand over the mic to Mr. Raman.
Thank you, Nida. Hi.
Hi, hi.
So it's finally so good to meet you.
Yeah.
As a bookseller, we are always passing the books that come to us into the hands of the readers, and the way your books have moved from my bookshop to the readers in Gantok has been quite a sight to see. It's amazing. Books have run out, and books had to be brought in at short notice, and then I see these youngsters go back with the books and post them on online, and passages, it's posting passages. So congratulations. A lot of congratulations for a lot of different things, but for having seen the way this book has moved from there, congratulations to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, as an interview, this is the first one for me, and I've got a set of questions so that I don't miss anything. But uh, from a small town girl to a tax collector in a big city to an author, how has the journey been for you?
Uh, well, I never really think about it in those terms. I am very aware that I'm from a small town, and I don't think of myself as, oh, I am a small town person, and now I have to go to a big city and uh, write, and that's my identity, small town girl writer, civil servant person. I don't actually think in those terms. I wanted to write, so I wrote. I wanted to become civil servant, so I did it. Just so happened that I was lucky in the both the attempts I had, and yeah, that's how I think things just fell into place at the right time.
Yes, it did. It's worked out really well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, well, I'll read some of the questions I have.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Your book is a retrospective account of all the characters who form a part of this, of the minutiae of life, right? And so, are these people in your stories? I mean, I'm sure people ask you. It reads as a very autobiographical too. Are these people who are real? Are they created? Are these the characters you've heard about or encountered?
They are uh, they are kind of fictionalized versions of real people I've met. I have met people, some of them I've heard about, some of them are real. I embellished them, heavily embellished them. They are inspired from people I've actually met or encountered while growing up, and I think while growing up, these people must have struck me as odd or interesting, and because of that, I must have retained a memory of them. Otherwise, I wouldn't recall them so many years later, 30 years later. You know, I won't think of writing about them if they didn't create some sort of impression to a young me, and I must have, you know, stored that memory somewhere and just regurgitated it later on when I felt like, okay, I think this person somehow interesting. I find them interesting, so maybe other people will find it. Other people might find this person as interesting as I did. So that was the hope, that people will be as interested in these characters I have embellished as I was growing up. I think everybody has every person you know, meet has some story, or you imagine them to have some sort of interesting background. I don't think anyone is boring, and perhaps I must have noticed something at that time. Children can be so intuitive without realizing it. They say the most politically incorrect things at the wrong time. So I think that played some sort of, you know, it played with my mind, it played in my mind. So I think that that's the way these kind of these figures emerged in my mind. So they are fictionalized versions of real people.
Well, me coming from such a different background and childhood, or even far removed from the kind of stories you've written, there are some characters who you've seen them in your lives also, like your grandmother's maid. What's her name?
B, yeah. Yeah.
B Mary. So I mean, yeah. So you know that these characters have been there, and you always, I mean, even as a child, like you said, sometimes you wonder, like these stories, and I mean, you still see in your neighborhood also this kind of people who are working there. So yeah.
Yeah, because you, when writing the book, I feel that geographically our childhood and upbringing may be different, but there's some things that remain the same. We still grow up with the same fears and the same joys and the same anticipations all over the country. And one thing people would message me after they've read the book is, "Oh, I knew someone who's like this. Of course, he had a different name, but we also had this one video guy in this one corner of the city that all of us would go to." Or, "Oh, even like, for some reason, everybody had a grouchy Hindi teacher. Grouchy Hindi teachers, ubiquitous." So a lot of people messaged me and said, "Oh, you know, we had the same kind of people, but you know, they were a little different. But it's very universal." And I made it a point to have characters that other people could conjure in their minds because of so many minute similarities that people would, you know, harken back to. So, like you
Exactly. I
said,
mean, even I mean, your teacher, for example, Mrs. Trivedi. There are people like her, like you said. You've grown up with them. You see them every day, and it's only after you've grown up and you lose contact with them that you remember. What were their lives like? Why did my teacher always? Why would he always wear a brown suit? Things
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that way, your book really reached out to me. These
Yeah.
two stories really did.
Yeah, actually, I started to remember more stories after I'd written the book. I I remember there was this we I studied in an all girls school, so there were only two male teachers, and those two male teachers would create such a, you know, such a ripple every time they'd walk past our classrooms. It's not that they were handsome or anything, but they were just the only male people in the school. And one of them, he was so flamboyant, he would wear a mustard shirt and a mustard Chinese shirt, and we'd always notice him and talk about him. And only after I finished writing the book, I think, oh, I should have talked about him as well. I wonder if everybody in other schools also had that one teacher who dressed up very outlandishly. I'm sure everybody
I'm
did.
sure. uh, But most of your stories, right from early on, it's narrated through eyes of a young girl. You know, it's like so. What is the thing about approaching these stories? I mean, and even though it's told from a young girl's point of view, you know, there's some certain sense of, you know, something is going to happen, something is going to happen, and you're telling it from a young girl's point of view. So this. Is this approach to telling your story from a young girl, because it comes from a place of innocence and about not being judgmental about what's going on around you?
Yeah, so basically, when I was writing the book, I was very much inspired by these two books I had read earlier. One is this book called Swallowing Mercury by Violeta Gregg. She's a Polish author, and she had written about Swallowing Mercury is a book about, again, through the eyes of a young girl, and it's about growing in uh, Soviet, Soviet controlled Poland, and, living with the shadow of, Soviet Russia's control, and, the superstitions that come with Catholicism and pagan rituals, and little things that children notice. She narrated all the events that happened in her young childhood through the eyes of that character, and I was very inspired by that. I picked up that book in a bookstore, and I don't think I would have picked up that book. I had not heard of that book, to be honest. That was the first time I'd seen that book, and it was in a bookstore. And that's why I think bookstores are so important. That you see a lot of books on Bookstagram, or maybe a newspaper will do a little bit of it if that particular author is very connected. You'll see that person's book being advertised a lot. But smaller authors, debut authors, they don't get that kind of pull and push from the publisher, or they don't have the contacts. You don't come across those books anyways, but I'm digressing. So uh, so I came across that book and I read it, and by that time I'd only written one chapter of the book. I'd only written Mr. Barua, and I had written it through the eyes of a child, Mr. Barua. And when I came across this book, I said, "Oh, she's doing what I had wanted to do." So I picked up that book, read it, and I was very inspired by it. And the second book I read that was another sort of inspiration was Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury, and he tells the story through the eyes of a young boy. And it's a very interesting book. He goes about his town and all the interesting characters that he, meets in his town. Uh, these old people. There's this man who traveled all over the world, and he's old and decrepit now. And he would, one of the stories, what he would call up his friend in Buenos Aires, this particular man who lives in this small town, and make that man hold out the phone outside the window so he can hear the sounds of the city. So it had really quaint stories like that. And this kid,
Yeah, but it's also so cinematic. The way you're narrating it also reminds me of what was that Italian film, Life is Beautiful, where a child is growing up
yeah,
in a
yeah,
very turmoil, you know, all
yeah,
around, and the father is doing so much to protect, you know.
yeah,
So it's also, and the child grows up and, you know, makes this story
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a great
yeah,
film. I really
yeah,
like
yeah,
that
yeah,
film. I watched that film at a very impressionable age. I
yeah,
think I must have been 16 when I watched that
yeah.
film. But in that case, I think it was through the eyes of the father
Yes,
protecting the
yeah,
child.
yeah.
In this case, is the child looking at, how adults are trying to come to terms with their own mortality. There's one chapter where they talk about a serial killer, and the kid is talking about it in such an interesting fashion, because adults, when we talk about serial killers, we don't talk about it the way a child would talk about. The kid is all in awe of what is this? What is a serial killer? What is this man going around just, knocking down women and stabbing them? He's talking it in a different way, a more light-hearted fashion, and adults are talking about it in different ways. So these two books, they really inspired me to write my own book in the same way how these children describe events that are seen so differently through the lens of a child and lens of an adult. uh, adults tend to be more jaded, more guarded. They don't take
Yeah,
risks.
that's
So that's why it's, I think that point of view, that worldview is a little more interesting.
yeah. Since we've spoken so much about the book, is there any passage you'd like to read from?
Yeah, I can
Mm.
read one passage. I didn't come prepared with a passage, so I'm just reading a passage I read recently. So this is from the chapter called "The Yellow Bear," and it's about. It's a very, I think you would call it a very. It is that vignette that Zuban liked to describe my book as, and it's just, it has no story as such, and perhaps people have that gripe that इसमें तो story ही नहीं है, लेकिन that's the story, that there is no story. Some things are stories in themselves just by being. So yeah, I'll be reading from the middle of the chapter. There's nothing to follow. It's not a spoiler or anything of the sort. Yeah, here goes. Every evening, we waited for our father to come home early from work so we could take cousin Muzzle's dog out. We were never told where his office was. He's gone to the forest, was my mother's reply to all my questions about our father's work. Indeed, he would come home smelling of earth, his jacket dusty and his shoes caked with mud. His clothes would have nettles and briars clinging to them as if they had hitched a ride from the forest. I would run toward him and he would pick me up and put me on his shoulder, making me feel like a giant, my stomach doing a whoosh as he would lift me. On some nights, he would not come home till it was dinner time. One such night, I could see deep furrows appear on my mother's forehead between her eyebrows. She looked worried, and I worried as a result. She stood near the gate with a lit cigarette, the chilly winds stinging her skin. My parents always smoked when they were anxious. At the end of every night, most ashtrays in the house were filled with ash. Mom made ashtrays of things that weren't meant to be ashtrays. On windy days, the ash blew off the places my parents had stubbed cigarettes in, and I felt I was in a grey, powdery snow globe. Unlike me, the stars above were indifferent to her worry, and the large tree we had in our garden rustled and shook, nodding in agreement and as the wind blew. In the distance, we could hear a pressure cooker screech intermittently. There was a small frog that stayed in a flower pot in our garden. We called him Freddy. He croaked in the night whenever he thought we went too near. The light near our front door attracted insects who were closely watched by the predatory lizards that clung to our brown walls. They stood silent, not moving, their tongues twitching. Giant moths tried entering the house as my mother absent-mindedly always left the front door open. I did not like them flitting about in the house, and I tried to throw them out. Their dusty gossamer wings struggled as I held them between my fingers, and the powdery substance stained my fingers silver. Mom, close the door. Bugs are starting to come in, I shouted when I turned off the lights in our porch. Or, oh, yes, she said absent-mindedly. I was scared that the giant moths would come in, and I knew I was not brave enough to catch those. My father had shown me one a long time ago. He had called my sister and me, shouting from the bottom of the stairs, Ali, Ali, come quickly and see this. We had run excitedly to the backyard, and he had pointed at it. It was perched on a pillar, and it had wings, and it had its wings closed. My father tapped it with his fingers to show me the pattern. When it relented to my father's gentle tapping and revealed itself to us, I was startled by its size and color. It was as big as my face, its wings splashed with patterns of orange and red and black and white. The sides of the moth had patterns that looked like eyes. I was repulsed yet awed. I stood next to my mother as we waited. On nights my father was late. You think a crocodile got Papa? I asked one night as I placed Bear next to her for comfort. No, no, he's fine. He's just late, that's all, she said as she tried to reassure me. When we sat on the wicker chairs in our garden and we waited in the dark by the light of the dying embers of my mother's cigarette. Finally, we heard the latch on the gate click, and I saw my father, dusty and tired, and I could feel him smile in the back. Mom was worried because you are late, I said as I went and stood next to him. Really? He asked teasingly. Nee, this child is just joking. I was perfectly fine, she said, slightly embarrassed but relieved as he walked back inside. Behind ours were two other houses. In one lived a Bengali family, in the other Assamese. We did not see each other very much because the entrance to their home was from the other side. We could see into their backyard because our house was at a height. The Assamese family would clean their utensils and clothes in their outdoor bathroom, and I could watch as the lady of the house threw yellow dishwater down the drain. Tall bamboo trees hid the backyard of our Bengali neighbors, so we never saw them. One time there was a wedding function that was taking place in their house. It went on for 7 days. It would start early in the morning and would go on late into the night. They caused such a din that on the sixth day my father decided he'd had enough. He started to throw stones from our house. Papa, what are you doing? I asked, half surprised and half amused. These people just don't know when to stop, he said. The way he said these people sounded pejorative. Did he mean Hindus who blow on their conches? Or Dakhars who didn't worry about how much they might be disturbing their neighbors? I did not ask him to explain. They've been going on for 7 days with no thought for anyone else. They need to know they're disturbing us, he continued as he picked up more rocks. He threw rock after rock, just like he would throw cold water at the stray cats when they would not stop howling in our yard when they were in heat. Just like it worked on the cats, the neighbors too eventually stopped. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, you've captured these moments at home so beautifully. I mean, I have a daughter, young daughter, and these moments where the moth and everything, you know, it was resonated with me very well. But this is also the story of Mr. Goa, right? The neighbor who,
This is
the
the
other, the person, the neighbor outside, the other, the one with the tall fencing around the house. I forget his name.
uh, which one? I don't.
Who comes to? I mean, there's a thief in the house.
Oh no,
That's a different story.
that's a different
Oh,
story.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So, which leads me to another question. It's your stories have got a lot to do with the political and social tensions in the region. You know, with these, they provide an important subtext to the characters and the lives that they endure. So sometimes when one is writing with all these things in mind, how difficult is it as a writer to present the things that in a way that doesn't trivialize or patronize the people you're writing about?
So since the entire thing is narrated through the eyes of a child, again, it would be her worldview, and her worldview, I cannot impose an adult worldview upon the way she sees what is happening, because again, like I said, children see things very differently than adults. Adults have more knowledge, more understanding, most of the time at least, I would hope. But they perhaps are their worldview is colored. Adults' worldview is colored, but children's worldview is not as colored by so many things that are coming. They only go by what they observe, what they see, and when writing about the politics, I would assume some people are saying, oh, she didn't write enough about it, she wrote too little about it. What about insurgency? Why hasn't she written about that? I'm not an expert. There's always the fear that I may write something wrong, and unless I have done a very thorough research, and there are better people writing about it, I feel. And I do not want to impose an adult worldview on this book. There is no omniscient narrator. in this book. There's no person going, and that is why this is wrong, and that is why insurgency was wrong, or that is why this happened. There is no omniscient narrator. It is just the child, and the child will view violence the way she would. She Children see things as very black and white.
No, I mean, this kind of debate I've seen happen as a bookseller and as a event organizer. I've seen this kind of debates happen over and over again. But personally, I feel if you have a story to tell, you also write a book, right? I
Yeah.
mean, somebody's put it out there, and there are different stories. Everybody's got a different story to share. So that's all there. Well,
This particular, I read this article in the Atlantic, and it was an article about female writers and the impositions on female writers. And one of the points made by the writer of that article said that there are too many impositions on writers, then that writer will not be able to do justice to their work. For example, there's this imposition on writers coming from war-torn areas, or violence-torn areas. There's this imposition that they should write only about the trials and tribulations, and the sadness and the violence and the muck that they are in. And the writer, I agreed, said that why can't an Afghani woman write a science fiction novel set in some random you know planet in a faraway galaxy? Why can't she write that? Why must she write about, the Taliban and how it's so sad that she's living under this regime? And why are we imposing this on writers from these
and
areas?
stereotypes too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you kind of, you pigeonhole, and it's a very insular worldview. I feel that books from a region can be, you can have a myriad, a variety of books from a region, and you shouldn't impose on a writer what you think a book should be. And I feel that in reading a book, you should, if you have a complaint, you should complain about what's in the book, not what's
What's
not
not in
in the
the
book.
book? Yeah. That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. Name, Place, Animal, Things by Daribha Lyndem. It's a wonderful book. I hope you've picked it up. There are copies at the book hub. Please get them signed. And we may be running out of time. Uh, if anybody in the audience have questions, now is the time. Any questions? Yes, I can see a hand.
Yeah, hi. Miss Lindem, this question is for you. So this passage you read out, no? So that's the child narrating, that's the child mind working, right? How old is that child, if I can ask? I'm sorry I missed the first part of the conversation.
uh, Again, I don't I think she's about 8, 9,
Oh, okay.
between
Okay.
8 and 10.
So it's like I always think about it when I read a novel. Um, is when a child is thinking and about these sensitive issues, no, like when you spoke about how the father called that person as these people, and the way the child was asking the question within him or herself, how much is it you writing, like I don't know when you wrote, how old are you, uh, and supplanting that in the child of a mind, or how do writers process that what a 8-year-old kid will be thinking at that point in time when he or she hears her father make a like you call pejorative kind of comment and all. Yeah.
So when you're writing, I think you can't. A writer does add a percentage of their view or their prejudices or whatever you may call it in the book, a little bit of their essence. Again, the child has not decided if it's pejorative or not. She's trying to understand, is this bad? In saying these people, a child understands there's a clear separation. These people as opposed to us. It's us and them, these and them. These. That's why language is so important, you know. These words, these signifiers, they hold so much weight. And in hearing the word these, she understands that there's a separation. So kids pick up on that. If you talk to any child, and I like to interact a lot with children because I think they have real moments of clarity better than us. Again, because they're not bogged down by, you know, this deluge of information that we are bombarded with. So they sometimes tend to see things more clearly. And in writing, in thinking about that, I would just imagine what would I do if I was in that situation, if I was a kid. How would I think of such a situation? So perhaps that came into mind. I wrote it a long time ago, I think around 4 5 years ago. So the exact processes of what was happening at the time I was typing it down, I do not remember, but I would imagine I put myself in the shoes of a child. I hope that answered the question.
We had a question here, gentleman over there. Can we turn the mic on?
Hello. Hi, good morning.
Morning.
My question was also along the line of what he asked about the process, but let me throw another question to you. This whole process of your book writing, was it a culmination of stories you've accumulated along the way and you noted them down and then you had an idea like, okay, maybe now I should write something? Or was there a point where you're like, I have all these stories now, so let me write something? So has it been uh, a journey, like a long process journey, or was there a point where you decided, I now have, like, now this is the time where I'm going to write the book? Yes.
So I remember one day feeling that I think I should start writing now instead of just, you know, complaining about, you know, not being able to write. So I wrote one of the stories. The first story I wrote was Mr. Barua. And I wrote that story and I sent it to one literary magazine in India. And they didn't get back to me. And I read the story in Bombay. They have a lot of these open mics where you can read your story and all that. So there was a competition. I went and read the story. I didn't win, of course, but a couple of people came up to me and said that they liked the story. So I finished the story, and then I realized I have a couple more stories that I can put down. I just started to remember things. I think I have fairly good memory when it comes to remembering odd things. I remember things that I find bizarre. So even with directions, I don't rely on a map more like I would rely on, oh, that place is next to that tree that's a bit weirdly shaped. So I remember things like that. I keep that in my mind. So I had all these stories and I wrote it down. To rejections, and I was like, okay, this should not hinder me. Let me finish all the stories. And once I started writing, all those other stories came tumbling out. It was not so hard to write it. The editing process took longer than writing. I think, 5 months to write, but it took 2 years to edit. So it was an easy process to recall these stories for some reason. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Any more questions?
Hi, good morning. Actually, you touched on what I wanted to ask a little bit with his question, but anyway, I'll ask it. So, given your location, as it were, in society, in this society, um, was it easy to get published?
No, I don't think it was easy to get published. I didn't think it was easy to get published because I cold emailed a lot of publishers. I filled the form. And all the websites they have. If you go to submit here, then you submit 2-3 chapters, and I thought it was very difficult. And because you haven't been published, so they don't are not really interested. So it's a funny thing that you don't get published because you're not published, but unless you're published you don't get published. So it's like a catch 22 kind of situation. So it it becomes difficult, and you worry about who will want to read a story about something that's set in the Northeast. But after I'd written the book, surprisingly, a lot of people did want to read about it, and I was glad. I think more people outside the Northeast have read my book than from within the Northeast. I'm basing this, of course, on the messages I receive on social media. People messaging me and telling me that it's nice to read something that's from about the Northeast. But I hope more people from Shillong, Meghalaya read my book as well. So I think people are changing their opinions.
Well, the book is here, the author is here, and it's been lovely being here. Thank you so much, Mary, for inviting us, and Shillong Lit Fest, and Daribha. Congratulations once
Thank
again.
you.
Wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raman and Daribha, for conjuring a nostalgic imagery of Shillong. You can get a copy of Name, Place, Animal, Thing from the Reading Hub bookshop right here. So do buy and get it signed from the author. And also, I like to call on stage the creative director, Mary Kurkalam, to present the speakers with mementos.